Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to the podcast and welcome to this week's episode. So I'm super excited to be sharing this conversation with you. It is a conversation very close and dear to my heart with a friend and someone I admire so deeply. She is the author of a book that is truly perspective shifting in my own journey called Regenerative Purpose, and her name is Wendy May. So Wendy and I was connected through Sabrina Monarch, who is one of my mentors. Wendy was on Sabrina's podcast. I believe I listened to that episode in 2021, essentially when it came out, and I immediately felt this deep resonance and deep connection with Wendy and started checking out her work. And her book, Regenerative Purpose, if you've had a session with me and you even remotely mentioned the word purpose, I would probably have sent this to you as a resource. It is truly mind-blowing, in my opinion. The first time I read it, I felt so affirmed and so nourished and so challenged all at the same time, which is when you know that you're reading a great text. Wendy and I spoke a little bit about how the process of writing that book almost felt like she channeled it, because when I read some of these passages back to her, she was saying that it felt a little surreal, so that's always a marker of a great work, I think. I think what's so amazing, I want to speak a little bit from my own personal perspective about my interaction with Wendy's work. For better or for worse, I have always felt myself to be driven by this concept. The idea of purpose and the purpose of my life has always been really a powerful motivation for me throughout my life. For a long time, it was also a point of contention for me. It was also a point of suffering because it felt like purpose was the zero-sum game, right? Like, what is my purpose in this life? And if I didn't fulfill my purpose, then this whole lifetime would have been a waste, essentially, right? And reading Wendy's work has really helped me understand purpose as a little different than what I had originally thought purpose would be. It had taught me that purpose is alive and that we are always co-creating with purpose. And so it is a very spiritual perspective in many ways. And I feel like Wendy's work has the potential to truly change us on so many different levels. So let me introduce you to Wendy by way of her bio. Wendy May is a purpose coach and purpose activist. She is the pioneering author of Regenerative Purpose, which offers a radical reframe of purpose as dynamic and relational, rather than fixed and personal. After leaving behind a successful corporate career, Wendy now facilitates others in the process of deep purpose alignment, so that we can create a world of work that works for everyone. Such a beautiful, resonant bio. I will let you get into this conversation with Wendy, and I will see you on the other side. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Wendy. Thank you so much for being here.
Super excited for this podcast.
Yay. Thank you so much, Wendy. I have to say that your work, Regenerative Purpose, to me is, and I don't say this lightly, and I really mean it from the bottom of my heart. I think it is a revolutionary text. And I feel like rereading it in preparation for our conversation, I feel that there's so much clarity, there's so much elegance, there's so much conviction in this text that is like it feels like a true transmission. So thank you for birthing it. And um yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you about it.
Yeah, it's so funny. It feels so long ago now that I wrote this book. And sometimes
I
even when I
bet.
open the book and I look at it, I'm like, I wrote that? I don't remember like how, I don't know, where did this come from? Something that came through and just is sort of timeless, actually. But now reading it, I'm like, wow, like I wrote this actually before COVID, before all of
Mm.
this thing happened. And yeah, it's still so relevant. I feel like even more so now.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. I feel like what is so powerful to me about this text is that it really feels like it honors the spirit dimension of like purpose work. There's a little bit of, you were so masterful at creating a framework around it, but there's also, um, a resistance towards making it like a two-dimensional model. It really feels
Mhm.
very dynamic. So that I really appreciate. And it feels, every time I read it, I learn something new from it. And so I believe you and we were introduced through Sabrina Monarch's work. I believe I found your work through Sabrina's podcast. I've been studying with Sabrina for a number of years, and then we started working together. And I've just really loved kind of being in your orbit and experiencing your brilliance. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I mean, this is an amazing example of regenerative purpose because I think working with you has also been very life-giving to me as
Mm,
well. Just feel so received and so appreciated. It gives me energy to continue creating and to branch out into new things, and also encourages me to keep sharing about regenerative purpose as well. So thank
hmm
you for that.
hmm So I'm really excited to talk about regenerative purpose with you today, as well as maybe branch out more into like what you have been thinking about recently and how you see regenerative purpose now that it's been at least a couple years since you wrote it. Okay. So I always like to begin in the same place with the same question for all of my guests, which is, I'm curious to hear who you sense, feel, or know yourself to be in this present moment.
Mm. Yeah, this is such a tough one to say in just a few words. It's funny because I used to call myself a digital nomad, but that doesn't really resonate with me so much anymore because I feel
Mm,
like so much of my life is not so digital anymore. Ironically, since the pandemic, I've become much more locally engaged with my community and doing more work offline.
mm,
And I'm not a nomad really anymore because I sort of got grounded and I am now rooted in my community in Thailand. So I guess yeah, it's interesting because these questions actually are asking us to pick categories to identify with somehow.
mm,
And I sort of have been spending a lot of my life sort of moving away from these labels.
mhm,
But I guess you
mhm,
could say that I'm a daughter of immigrants to the US of Taiwanese and Chinese descent. And I now live in Thailand, where I'm choosing to ground and to root and to build a home and invest in my community here. And that's the situation until it changes.
I love that. Yeah. Um, how did you get to this point? I'm curious to hear more about your life story, about how you came into this work around purpose, and also I don't know if you feel like sharing. I'd love to hear your sun moon rising too.
Yeah, so Taurus sun, Taurus moon. I'm a new moon baby, so my sun and moon are almost conjunct, and Aquarius rising.
Mm,
And as far as how I got here, I mean, there's just a long line of synchronicities and omens and coincidences and also choices that I made that led me to leave my corporate job after 15 years of working in leadership development, organizational design, in-house sort of training, human resources types of jobs in different capacities, also as a management consultant, doing restructuring for big companies. I basically had a burnout and decided that I was going to take a sabbatical. At that time, I thought it was a 1-year sabbatical. And a lot of things happened in that year, including my father passing away and me starting a retreat for women that I called Life Reboot. And it was really about reaching a hand to people like me, basically, that were sort of in corporate jobs or wanting to be entrepreneurs or like starting their own businesses and wanting to be more heart-led in the work that they were doing in life, and helping them through transition time. And I was using a lot of the tools and techniques that I had learned from coaching people in a corporate setting, but then applying it to people that were transitioning from one form of work to another. And I was doing that work on an individual basis, coaching people, also coaching executives who were in roles on leadership as well. And, I didn't know that it was purpose work at the time, actually. Like I was doing this for probably about 4 years. And only when I looked in the rearview mirror did I start to sort of put this word purpose around it. At the time that I was doing it, I was really just helping people that wanted to make change in their life and looking into what was motivating the change, what was helping them make decisions and align with their path moving forward. Like, what is the old me that I'm shedding and what is the new me that I'm sort of trying on and experimenting and growing into? And then the purpose term came later, actually. I didn't call it that from the beginning.
I love that what I'm hearing from you is that there's a pattern around recognizing patterns that emerge from the practice, because this is kind of also what I was feeling from your work and how you talk about purpose. There was this beautiful part in your book. If it's okay, I would like to kind of quote your words back to you. The way I see it, purpose is not about uncovering a hidden assignment that you have to complete. It's about becoming more available to serve in each waking moment. Purpose happens when a need that we are uniquely equipped to serve presents itself to us and we are present enough to respond. And I feel like this particular quote really spoke to me because there's kind of an emergent quality to how you define purpose. And what I loved about this text, one of the things I really love about it was how it really feels to me like you are trying to define purpose at many different points and in many different ways. Like, I wouldn't go as far as saying that the definitions were contradictory, but it was as if like throughout the process of reading it, the reader also gets to know purpose a little bit more. And also for me, what's so exciting is like realizing that it's such a different thing and it's such a different paradigm than what I'm used to when I'm thinking about purpose and what I've been conditioned. And I guess I would love to hear you talk a little bit about how you would kind of define purpose at this moment in your life.
Yeah. I think it's the experience of purpose to me is really this sense of aliveness and alignment, which kind of feed each other, right? So this feeling of, I feel like I'm in the right place at the right time. There's a locational quality to it. So understanding where you fit into the larger picture, your node in the interdependent web of existence, and also feeling a sense of activation and a sense of engagement and a sense of just this like tingling feeling, this electricity that comes from being plugged into that web, right? So this, and the two things kind of feed each other, right? So when we feel like we're aligned and we're in the right place to serve and to receive and to be in this kind of ecosystem, and that we're appropriately placed, that also brings this sense of aliveness, and vice versa, right? When we feel alive and we feel engaged and we're in our flow and we're activated and excited about life, then that helps us to find the right place, right? So those two
Mm.
things kind of hand in hand.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think this locational piece that you mentioned feel very crucial to me because oftentimes there was also another point later where you talk about the kind of convergence of time and space and how a lot of us have, I mean, if you look at the self-help section in any bookstore, right, there is such a gravitational pull towards like managing your time, right? Or like, mastering productivity. But we don't always talk a lot about managing space and creating space in our lives. So you were talking about productivity versus synchronicity and this idea that mastering time helps us get closer to productivity while managing space helps us move towards synchronicity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious if anything is coming up for you. I'm not sure if I have a question necessarily, but yeah, if you would like to kind of expand on that idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this shift from orienting ourselves towards space versus time in terms of how we're organizing our experience of life is really life-changing in my experience. So when we're looking at time, there's it's a very linear perspective, right? So there's a chronology of like you're born and then you die and then you have like certain steps that you take in between.
Mm-hmm.
And it brings this very sort of logical, rational, stepwise, first you do this, then you do that kind of approach to life, which is useful. And I think that is probably the predominant way that we have been navigating life for, last few hundred years at least. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that what's happening now with people growing in consciousness and elevating their awareness around different dimensions is that we are becoming more spatially oriented, right? Which adds the possibility of multiple dimensions co-occurring, and also the feeling of infinite possibility opens up, right? It's not as finite. And there's also more magic involved, right? So this idea of synchronicity, this also comes with humility, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the linear approach to life, I would say, to me, is a very egocentric one, right? I am the one who is calling the shots. I am deciding that this is the plan. Here is the strategy to achieve the plan, and so on. We know how that works, right? This is what we've been indoctrinated in. And then this other way of being is so much more about surrendering and trusting in something that is beyond what we can really grasp or hold on to or control and manage. And this is so scary, right? The ego is like, no, but I want to stay in command. And
Mm-hmm.
this other way of engaging with life is something that we're relearning, I think, right? It is something that we know how, right, to be that way, but we've forgotten, right? Because the other part has become much more dominant. So the spatial orientation really opens up to more of this surrendered feeling, right? So this engagement, but also understanding that we are not alone in doing anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't think that you really put these words around these concepts in your book, but it feels like that idea feels very spiritual to me. Like even this idea of, humility and how we're connected to the web of life, right? To me, those two are intricately connected. Like part of, where we source our humility is from also realizing that we're not the only agent that's responsible, Perhaps we've never been. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a very spiritual book in many ways. And I would say probably at the time that I was writing it, I was a little bit more in the spiritual closet. So I was probably not speaking about these things quite so explicitly, but it's there. The undercurrent of this awareness is definitely infused throughout the book. Even the way that I wrote the book,
Mm,
feels very much aligned with what I'm talking about in the book,
mm,
in the sense that I had a lot of resistance in the beginning, right? I kept getting messages to say, you need to write a book. It came in many different forms through many different channels. And I was like, no, no, you have the wrong girl. I have no idea how to write a book. I've never done it before. I'm sure it will not be successful. And anyway, I'm busy. I've got all these other things I need to do. But I kept getting this knock, and then,
mhm,
through a bunch of different omens and coincidences that were not really coincidences, I finally got the message and accepted it and said, okay. And basically, from my perspective, what happened is I signed a contract with Spirit to say,
mm,
okay, I'm here for this book. I'm available. Show me the way. Right. And
mhm,
so there's that sense of availability and like willingness, that is kind of the entry point for source energy to flow, right? So
mm,
then I was getting woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning, sending myself voice messages, taking notes, and was getting downloads, and things were just happening. And then at some point, it stopped. The creativity stopped. I went through this dark night of the soul of like, I'm going to burn this book. It's complete crap. It's never going to be finished, right? I don't know what I was thinking, and I went through this whole like inner work process around creating the book and being
mm,
willing to, step into the unknown and being willing to face failure and, ask for support, right? So this dark night of the soul that I went through with the book is what caused me to then reach out for help in the form of a Kickstarter campaign in which I
mm,
was literally asking life to say, hey, if you want me to finish this book, I need some help. I
mhm,
need some energetic help. I need some financial help. I need 200 people voting yes, I want this book to exist in order to give me the impulse and the energy that I need to continue this project, right? So
mhm,
that was very much a dance of kind of this spiritual movement of energy and my own ego fighting it, and then also then finally the merging of those, right? It's like, okay, spirit's like, I can't do this on my own, like I need you to manifest it, but I'm like, okay, well, you need to send me some support then in order for me to keep going, right? So this is really that sacred union, what I talk about in the book around the sacred union of a divine plan and
mhm,
grounded action.
mhm. Yes, I actually really love that passage as well. Um, you wrote, "Purpose is a sacred union of a divine plan and grounded action. As human lightning rods, we are made to grab ethereal concepts and ideals and translate them into practical, tangible reality. We're doing this all the time, whether we realize it or not. We shape the outer world and we create our inner reality with the resources we have at hand. How we choose to spend and invest our energetic and material currency is ultimately how we choose to deploy our life force." Yeah, that is really powerful. And I love also hearing that story because it reminds me of something that you wrote in the book, which is the idea that being able to receive from the world, be that energetic or actual financial support, is a really important part of purpose. And I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit more about this because I think this really kind of goes against the grain of what a lot of us have been taught around the myth of right? That if you are doing something that you are put here on this earth to do, that you don't really need money to do it. And then the other one, which is this myth of the lone genius. Like, when I think I had a classical music background and I grew up with these fables, about how Beethoven, right, had to be this lone genius that like is going against the grain and the current of his current time. So it feels to me like your um, work around purpose is kind of a reminder to not walk the path alone, but rather kind of create a web of community through the work that we have been entrusted to do. Um, yeah, anything you would add to that or that you would kind of share around that feels alive at this moment?
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like there has been a bit of a pendulum swing in this department. So we
Mm,
have this I guess, old conditioning, maybe, that it's not okay to do things that you love and also make money. But the funny thing is, what I see happening now is that there's almost this opposite thing happening
Mm.
where there's almost like an overemphasis on making money, right?
Yeah.
So kind
Yeah.
of, yeah, we kind of ping pong to the opposite thing, right? So there's this whole movement around financial liberation, and it's like you can do what you love and you can get rich doing it. But then the danger is that we're sort of reproducing the same toxicity, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
around this hierarchical, scarcity-based economy, which is ultimately a pyramid scheme in the end,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's a lot of people that are, I don't know what you would call them, maybe like influencers or something, that are
Yeah.
out preaching this gospel of you can do anything and you can make lots of money, and pitching it in terms of teaching people how to do six-figure launches or have a seven-figure year and this kind of thing, which is, it's limiting in my view, because I think that while that model might have been successful for a few people on Instagram who've made
Mm.
multi-million dollar businesses from social media, that's not an infinite pool, right? And in that
Mm-hmm.
case, we're again giving up authenticity to copy something that we see as successful, right? So we've just changed the mode in which we project success onto other people who've done something that we want to do or have something that we want to have, but then we're
Mm-hmm.
not really in touch with our own authenticity anymore. We're just copying another template.
Mm-hmm.
And that, in my opinion, is doomed to fail. It's doomed to fail the person, is also doomed to fail the collective ultimately, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
how many Instagram influencers, mega business coaches do we need, right?
Yeah.
So
It's a
it's
really good point.
yeah. So I think that, when I talk about this, it's like, okay, I do want to acknowledge the fact that there has been a legacy of exactly what you said around
Mm.
feeling like we need to do charity work in order to do good things in the world. That's not true, right? But it is about balance, right? And this again brings us back to humility.
Mm.
And I wrote an article a few years ago around staying small and going slow. So this idea that our society teaches us to go big or go home, right? That
Mm.
success is around having millions of followers and making millions of dollars. And it's actually not about the scale, it's about the balance. So if we're all in our correct location in the interdependent web, the flow of money and resources becomes natural and effortless. And if we're operating out of generosity and not scarcity, whatever comes to us naturally is going to move through us as well, right? We're not hoarding it. We're not holding on to it. We're not accumulating it. To give an example with health, for example, right? If you consume more than you create or generate or give out, you become obese,
Mm-hmm.
right? This accumulation of fat, this storage is unhealthy. But somehow we haven't realized the same thing about money,
Mm-hmm.
that when we accumulate, that ultimately there is stagnation there, right? So great, make millions of dollars, but then also be investing millions of dollars in yourself, in your staff, in your community, in new projects, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the next form of your purpose, rather than guarding something and trying to hold on to it to be a legacy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is something that I've been thinking a lot about recently, which is the idea of stewardship. And I think that it's something that feels like such a foreign concept to a lot of us. Like this idea of what it means to be able to steward when we have an abundance of something, whether that be talent or resources or access to certain kinds of people. It's very hard to not be in like a hoarding mentality, not be in an exploiting mentality, but to kind of figure out what it means to steward. And that is also an ever shifting thing, right? It may change depending on the situation that we find ourselves in.
I'm curious actually, what's your definition of stewardship? What would you say stewardship is?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say, to me, I'm kind of thinking about this in terms of um, like management of resources, right? And how we relate to our resources, like at the heart of it all, right? Because to me, resources are always about this imbalance between um, what someone is able to hold or to generate and what other people may be looking for, right? Or may not feel like they have enough of. And so to me, stewardship, it is about like how do we behave? How do we hold up? What postures do we hold when we happen to have something in our hands, right? Yeah, what do we do with that which we do have? I would say is how I would define stewardship, maybe. Hmm.
Yeah, that's nice.
And sometimes, stewardship can look like getting rid of things. And sometimes it means, nurturing things, right? But I don't think there's like um, one solid definition of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So how would you contrast stewardship with ownership? And what's the distinction or what's the different quality?
I think when we talk about ownership, it feels to me like there's an energy of entitlement, whereas with
Mm,
stewardship, it's an energy of service, right? That we are in service of and in service to the thing that we are holding, as well as the community that we are beholden to. Whereas I think with regards to ownership, it's more like, this is mine. Let me have it. Mm.
yeah. I think there's also the quality of permanence versus like fleetingness or
Mm.
temporariness.
Mm-hmm.
Stewardship feels much more um, time limited, I guess. It's sort of the
Yeah.
acknowledgement we're going to pass at some point, and this thing will maybe outlive us or not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a beautiful segue to this idea of death being part of the purpose process that you mentioned in the book. Um,
Yeah.
it really struck me the first time I read it, and it struck me even more the second time I read it, which is you kind of contrasted this idea of building empires versus making waves. I'd love to hear you talk more about that, whatever's coming up at this moment.
Yeah, it's very much related to stewardship. I think it's this idea that, there's a few things in there. One is that one of the unlearnings I think we have is to decouple our life story from the forms of purpose that we create, right?
Mm,
So when we move away from this single purpose, single mission idea, and we allow for the fact that we can have multiple purposes at the same time, and that the purpose itself is kind of going through its own life cycle that may or may not match our exact lifespan,
mm-hmm,
then it becomes so much more interesting. But it also requires us to be that much more conscious and that much more awake and attuned to what's actually happening, right? There's
mm-hmm,
no automatic pilot in that option, because if you're managing all of these resources and all of these forms that are, some of them are being birthed, some of them are growing and expanding, some of them are needing to be retired or they're decaying and they need to be composted, then there's some attention that needs to go into that. And this is, again, counter to a lot of the conditioning that we've received, which is it's all about legacy, right? The idea
mm-hmm,
of like, you want to build a bunch of buildings and put your name on the front of the door and make sure that they, are still standing by the time that you're in the ground and your body is decaying. And there's this idea of cheating death in some ways by
mm-hmm,
making something that lasts longer than us.
mm-hmm.
Building a tower in your name, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think this is kind of bringing me to what you wrote probably kind of early on in the book around the idea about um, essentially how purpose can also become part of the problem, or our seeking and our definition of purpose when it's too much connected to this is how I'm interpreting what you're saying. Not exactly what you're saying verbatim, but what I was feeling was that you were cautioning the readers to not bypass their own humanity, right? Like part of our humanity is that at some point we are in a limited form and that we are supposed to decay. We are supposed to
Yeah.
die. And that's part of the life cycle. And for a lot of us, we came into what we think of as our purpose path because we're trying to yeah, like you said, cheat death, right? Like we're trying to not die. And it becomes yet another really creative and elaborate way for us to avoid the process of learning how to die.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm curious about your relationship with cultivating the skills around dying, and especially, as we both know, we've been living the past couple of years in very close proximity to death, right? In one way or another, with this pandemic that we're currently in. How has your relationship to death shifted with doing purpose work or
Yeah.
contemplating purpose? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I have done some work with this quite directly in different ceremonies and things like that, working with the idea of death, meditating on death, doing death rituals and things like that. But I would say in a broader sense, it's really about just noticing and accepting death in all its expressions. And it doesn't necessarily mean physical death. While I have lost people during the pandemic, it's also just noticing that that is part of life, right? That is actually something that is constantly happening, and it's not this kind of extreme episode or dramatic thing. It's in many ways gently happening all the time. I mean, just this year, I've had the death of 2 business partnerships that I thought were happening, and romantic relationship as well, and financial investments, right? So creative projects, friendships as well, that have sort of maybe in less dramatic ways faded away or become less central in my life. And it's not that they're dead necessarily, but just noticing the seasons of when things are more alive or less so in my sphere. And witnessing that with this kind of wonder of like, wow, okay, that was cool. That's interesting. And looking at that death with hopefulness by orienting around the space that it creates. Yeah, because when we are leaving things or losing things or letting go of things, that always creates space, and that's where the new things are born. So it's always inextricably linked, right? Whenever something is dying, something is birthing as well. So you never just have one without the other.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of the times, especially in Western culture, we get so caught up, rightfully so perhaps, in the grieving process of it and the emotionality around death. But yeah, I think there's something really profound about also realizing that life is a march towards death, right? Like it's literally, I mean, even just the level of our energy throughout the day. We wake up with a certain level of finite energy, and then literally throughout the day, right, we are depleting that energy until we have to sleep, you know?
Yeah. And grieving is a celebration of life. It's actually just the acknowledgement that life is precious You
Yeah.
know, when we grieve something, it's because we're honoring how beautiful life is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you feel like you went through a certain death process when this book was completed?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely went through a bit of a postpartum depression when it was done because it was so much of my life for
Yeah.
a year, and then it was done. And then there was this kind of, I don't know if I want to say disappointment, but almost kind of this like let down feeling of like, that's it. It's just
Mm.
done. Like there was no big boom or anything that happened. It was just like, you know, some people read it, but it wasn't like, I don't know, somehow there was this feeling of loss.
Mm.
Um, yeah, which was really just losing the sense of anticipation of the moment the book that would be published, right? So that
Mm-hmm.
moment happened, it passed, and then it was done. It's kind of like, oh, wait, that's it? I thought there was going to be more than that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And then again, connecting to like what's happening now, which is, you know, it's taking different forms, or I'm sharing it in different ways, or I'm actually focusing my attention on other things these days, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
just sort of like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
it's here. The book exists. It's walking around in the world. It's a toddler now. It sort of has legs and it can wander around by itself. It doesn't need me to mother it so closely. But there is this part of me that's still kind of curious to know what it's doing in the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And wondering, well, maybe I should be doing more. Am I a good enough mother? Like maybe I should be promoting more or speaking more about it.
I'm very familiar with that feeling.
Complicated relationship with the creation.
I think that's one of the challenges of creating longer form work, which I think doesn't really come with shorter form works. Like, for example, if it's just, if it's just a podcast episode or if it's just an Instagram post, right? Like, you don't feel such a burden around having to shepherd it a certain way or having to steward it to go back to that
Yeah.
word, right? In a certain way. But I feel you. I think when it's something as significant as a book or an album or a movie, you feel beholden to have to show up a certain way to support the livelihood of the book beyond the release. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm just really doing my best to practice the principles of regenerative purpose in my relationship with regenerative purpose, right? So I'm responding, right?
Yeah.
So when we spoke and you said, oh, why don't you come on my podcast and talk about it? I'm like, okay, so that's there. And we have this connection and it feels easy and yeah, like alive for me to do this. So, but at the same time, I'm not sitting around like researching podcasts and sending out pitch letters and
Mm-hmm.
really pushing in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm still waiting for Oprah to discover the book so then it can really spread its wings and have its impact on humanity. But yeah, it's a tough thing to navigate this stewardship of not wanting to be a helicopter mom with the
Mm-hmm.
book and
Mm-hmm.
also not pushing, but also not dismissing it either
Mm-hmm.
because it's something hard or something that feels unfamiliar for me to do because I'm not really a PR person or a public speaker or something, you know? So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I can engage with this a little bit, but on my edge of comfort, but without going into this, like, this has to happen, or I need to push this to this outcome, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. 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 I'm a little torn here. There are a couple places that I want to go with you around this. I'm just gonna go with my instinct because initially I wanted you to talk more about the model that you presented, but I'm actually more curious at this exact moment to explore with you, like what have you done since you were done with this book? What have you been exploring? What avenues of thought? What topics? What aspects of being alive is, you know, occupying Wendy's mental real estate these days.
Yeah. Well, I have an amazing opportunity to practice my own teachings in a deeper way now because I have acquired a piece of land here in Thailand where I live.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it's interesting, actually, we speak about stewardship because a lot of the land that's available is for long-term lease. So as a foreigner, I have 30 years of use of this land. And then at the end of that time, it goes back to the Thai family that owns it, which is a really interesting way to create something that you know that is going to have to be released at some point. So this is something that's been happening. I've been learning a lot of different life lessons in that. One of them being around really taking ownership of the things that I'm creating. What I noticed this year was a pattern in myself around wanting or waiting for someone else to give me permission to, be my buddy, to be my business partner, to help me to manifest the thing. And it's been taken away time after time. And now I'm starting to accept that, okay, again, like I did with the book, I need to be willing to sign a contract with spirit. And I need to be willing to show up to lead, but also to lead with humility, right? So what is the balance of, okay, this is my life assignment. It's clearly been given to me to create something on this piece of land, and not to go into this martyr mode of like, okay, I have to do everything by myself and it feels so heavy and it's up to me to carry all of this load, right? So what is the balance point between I have to do everything by myself, or I'm waiting for an external authority or external buddy to give me permission to start moving? So it's this interesting dance of like, okay, first I'm going to say I'm anchoring myself here. This is my vision. This is my energy. And then allowing the resources that I need to support me to then be magnetized. So this is what's really alive for me, what's happening right now. And it really does feel like that regenerative purpose is the way that I'm creating in this new space. So I'm practicing what I've been preaching, I guess.
How has that transition from usually, being more in that mode of like joint venture, right? Like having a partner in doing things. How has the shift from that to doing it kind of like allowing yourself to be the partner you needed to give yourself permission? How has that impacted your approach to life and approach to seeing the world?
I mean, it's really me deepening in my spiritual connection, I would say, because it's seeing that whatever I'm doing is a collaboration with spirit. And this idea that I have a constellation of support around me, but in the world of form, in the world of people and personalities, it's not just one person, it's not just one thing. That I can get many different kinds of support from many different people, but I'm not abdicating my own authority. It really also calls for me to trust more deeply in my own intuition and my own guidance, which is soul sourced, and following that unapologetically, right? And not feeling like I can't do it because I'm a woman, because I'm alone, because I'm a foreigner, whatever all the excuses are for not stepping up to do things that are scary. Right? So the reason that I know I'm on my purpose path is because my ego is quaking. Again, the same story as when I stepped into writing the book, which is you don't know what you're doing. You're going to lose all of your money. This is going to fail. It's going to be humiliating, right? All of the things that the ego is like, no, don't do that. Don't go there. And the
Yeah.
soul is like, yes, this is what you need to learn, right? This is actually the size of the fire
Mhm.
that you need to proceed, right? To get to the
Right.
next level. Yeah.
Right. Wow. Wow. I love that. Um, this idea of collaboration with spirit has actually been really present in the field. And I guess, between me and some of my astrologer friends, we've been kind of talking about it in terms of Jupiter and Pisces. So Jupiter recently left Pisces into Aries, and it really feels like this period of Jupiter and Pisces, a lot of people were talking about it in terms of like, oh, we're going to have this really magical experience. But as it turns out, rather than it being like an external experience, a lot of it has been very much internal, and it has been a fortification of our own sense of faith, however that really lands for you, and however you have, your relationship is with that word. And this idea of like spirit being one's primary collaborator has been really present in the collective,
Yeah.
I feel like. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. A lot of people around me are learning that lesson as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting to be thinking about, the idea of trustworthiness, right? Because I think we can feel on the one hand that, it is kind of fickle to be relying on something that we can't see or we can't hold with our physical hands. But on the other hand, knowing the ephemeral nature of the physical body, is it really responsible to be holding on to the tangible things? you know? So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very well said.
Hmm. Curious to hear if you are open to sharing, Wendy, about your relationship being in a land you don't really have any particular like ancestral or familial or even like cultural, at first at least when you moved, right, connection to Thailand, right? But you have essentially decided to make it your home, and I'm curious to hear about that that immigrant
Yeah.
experience for you. Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I have no idea how I ended up here really, except for just one step at a time. Like I came for a Tantra teacher training back in like
Mm.
2015, 2016, and I was never intending to stay here long term. I was seasonal, I was coming and going like a lot of the nomads were doing. And then I stayed for the book. So I got a clear message from the book in 2018 that you need to stay put and write the book here.
Mm.
So I was like, okay. So I gave up my 2019 festival season in Europe to finish the book. And then COVID happened. So then I found myself basically continuously here for 3+ years. And somehow during that time acquired a piece of land that I'm
Mm.
stewarding. So
Mhm.
it just sort of happened to me. Like I almost feel like this place chose me. Like I didn't really decide to live here, it just sort of happened. Um, because yeah, it doesn't make sense logically. But I would say also home is, I mean, it's so trite to say this, but it's this idea of home is where the heart is, right? So
Mhm.
your community, and this is what happened here during the pandemic, is that, and I think in a lot of places, probably people were restricted from traveling and then suddenly decided in this game of musical chairs, like, okay, I'm going to take a chair here,
Yeah.
I'm going
Right.
to sit and stay a while. I'm going to ground. And what happened is that much deeper connections were formed with the people that were here
Mm.
by choice or by chance. And that is now what is keeping me here, is this
Mhm.
connection with the people here that I have that are really close friends, that are my soul
Mhm.
family, basically. So I can't imagine living anywhere else.
Wow. Yeah. What's your relationship with the land itself nowadays?
I haven't really been doing much there because I've had a lot of turmoil in the last year or so around different, yeah, business partnership configurations that didn't pan out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's empty right now. There's
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure in terms of a road and electricity, but other than that, I've just been going every other month or so. Usually when I have my moon time and I'm bleeding, I go in and do a ritual there where I give my blood to the land. And in this way, by giving my menstrual blood to the land, I'm sort of cultivating a relationship with it, connecting energetically, being in communication, being in communion, and receiving messages, basically. And for a long time, the message has been, you're not allowed to know what's happening here. You're not allowed to know.
Mm-hmm.
Stop asking. You're not allowed to know. And then more recently, the message has shifted a bit to just start. And of course, my ego or my logical brain is wanting to follow up and say, start what? And then it goes back to, you're not allowed to know.
Yeah.
It's like, just start. So basically what I'm doing now is inviting friends to come and see the land with me, which is helping me to sort of formulate some visions and to solidify some ideas around what might be there. So I'm talking to people about it. I'm bringing people there to walk around and starting to do some site planning with like permaculture principles in mind. So bringing some experts in that arena to come and survey the land and make a map of it, so to speak. So it's going to be a slow process. I think I'm not in a hurry to start building anything. I think it's much more important for me to really take the time to connect with the place and understand what wants to happen there, so I don't get confused about what my ego might want to have happen there.
I really like what you were sharing about bringing your friends there too, because I do think that when it comes to something as vast as a piece of land, it's really interesting to see how different people interact with the thing, and how that also shifts your perspective about the energy of the thing itself, to see different people like kind of interacting and hearing their thoughts about it, or hearing how they are in that in that very specific part of the earth, right? Which again kind of brings me back to this idea of locality that you mentioned. I do think it's very interesting to think about how a lot of our purpose work is very much about like being at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, it's very true. And when I bring my friends there, it's like bringing extra antennas, basically, to spirit, because everybody has their own connection. And then when I bring people there, I get different messages through them in just the way that they walk around the land, in seeing which trees that they stop underneath, or whatever it is, that they see, helps me to see more dimensions of it as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm really excited to see what you end up doing with it.
Yeah.
Or what comes out of that relationship. Yeah.
It's true. It's very emergent, like you were saying in the beginning, right? It has this emergent process of revealing itself. It's also recognizing the land itself as being its own entity. It has a shape already. It has a personality.
Exactly.
It has an energy. And it's also about not trying to overpower that, but really inviting it to come out and show itself.
Yeah, and also being attuned to, what does this piece of land want me specifically to collaborate? How does this piece of land want me to collaborate with it?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear, kind of going back to regenerative purpose. I'm curious to hear if you would like to share about the model that you shared, because in the book, right, you kind of really elegantly created this model of gift, pain, creative flow, and abundance flow. And then with each of them, kind of, trickling it down to 4 qualities of being, right? Authenticity, attunement, responsiveness, and receptivity. And I really appreciated this part of the book. I feel like it's a really elegant way to kind of summarize something, but also in a way that feels really dynamic and alive to me. So, yeah, how would you kind of explain this model to someone who maybe, you know, it's their first time hearing about this?
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting because it came from many different directions in
Mm,
terms of noticing things from when I was speaking about purpose in my women's retreats or when I was coaching people around this topic, noticing themes.
mhm,
So this is something that I did a lot as an organizational consultant, is that I would interview people and ask them all different sorts of questions and collect all the data kind of verbatim without filtering it. And then I would go through a process of qualitative data analysis, which was basically pattern recognition, right? So we would do what we called thematic analysis and pull out the things that were repeating, right?
mhm,
With multiple speakers and multiple perspectives, but kind of the same thing in different words. So there was a little bit of that was going on when I was creating this model. And then there was also this interesting thing that happened where I noticed that the themes that I was noticing in the one-on-one work and the group retreats that I was doing also kind of were an antithesis to this four-part Venn diagram model that had become very popular. This,
mm,
you've probably seen it with the four circles of like what you love to do, what the world needs, and so on and so forth. And I thought, oh wow, actually, what I'm noticing is an upgrade of that understanding.
mhm,
Because the themes that I was finding fit into those four buckets roughly, but also expanded on them in some way,
mhm,
right? So this idea of what you're good at, and then authenticity is so much more expansive to me than what you're good at, right?
mhm,
Because what you're good at, it's like, okay, it's your skills, it's your talents, it's the things you know how to do, but authenticity is actually so much more than what you do. It's your being, right? It takes
mm,
it from the doing to the being. And
mhm,
authenticity is, it includes the things that you're good at, but it also includes um, your preferences, your wounds, even, you know, all of the unique stories and histories and um, things that you are able to do and able to see and transmit and embody that are unique to you.
mhm. It's the fullness of who you are.
Yeah,
Mhm,
exactly. And then this whole thing about what the world needs becoming the quality of attunement, right? Because what the world needs feels very almost presumptuous to me, like I know what's best kind of
mhm,
thing. But in reality, it's with the filter of humility, it's really around understanding your antenna, what it's taking in, right? What it is set up to receive,
mm,
and really paying attention to that these particular signals that are for you specifically, being able to pick those up and let those activate you and let those move you into movement, right? Into doing and creating something. Um, and the other two were the movements. So if authenticity and attunement are sort of the opposite sides of the model in terms of there is some quality around you within yourself, and then there's some quality about you in relationship to the world, which is what I
mhm,
would think of as attunement.
mhm,
Then there's a movement of energy, right? So it's a sort of, this is the regenerative part of it. The regenerative part of it is that there's a balance between giving and receiving.
mhm,
And when we're giving from a place of love, of presence, of spontaneity, of being in the moment and knowing the appropriate thing
mm,
that is not from our past conditioning and not from programming, right? So
mhm,
this is that quality of responsiveness, the ability to respond. And then the receptivity is allowing yourself to be in relationship to the world, not only to be resourced by it and nourished by it materially and financially, but also to be guided by it, right? To
mm,
understand like how to take in feedback, how to be redirected, uh, rejected, right? Or redirected into a different way of being. And it's not just about money. It's actually about the receiving end of your co-creative relationship with the universe. So expressing, offering, giving, sharing, and you're also receiving, being supported, being guided, being led by spirit.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it in a nutshell, I think.
It's beautiful. I love how elegant it is, and it feels crystal clear and like really exciting to me. And as I was hearing you kind of recount the model, what really struck me this time around is how that receptivity, that there are so many different signals that the world kind of, shall we say, like throw back at us, right? Whenever we're putting something out, or whenever we share our creative project or creative baby, right? It's not just money, but there's also like energetic responses. There are also sometimes silence, and that's like its own kind of signal, right? Yeah, I'm curious then, with regards to that, right? With regards to receptivity around the world's responses, and its many different responses to what we put out there. What have you found to be the biggest block for people usually around like wanting to share their unique gifts, and what have you found to be, a potent antidote to that block?
Yeah. I'm going to answer a different question, I think.
Okay, go for it.
It's around this concept of receptivity. And there's something that feels very alive for me now in terms of expanding on this part of the model in particular. Because I think that this is probably the part where we need the most work. I hesitate to say that because everybody has different things that they're working on in all of the 4 dimensions. But I think on a systemic level, receptivity is the one where we have the most distortion. Because the signals that we get from the world are not necessarily clean and clear. And to use myself as an example, I could take the feedback from life that Regenerative Purpose is not a New York Times bestseller to mean that the book is not needed, or that it's not relevant, or it's not timely. And I actually don't believe that to be true. But there is something about the system that we're in terms of how we share, create, and get paid for work that is not quite matching with this way of moving in the world, right? So I would say that the model that I put forth is a nice theory, but in reality, we're not there yet, right? Because we have a lot of institutions, platforms, and systems that are really wired to the old way of doing things. The old way of doing things being much more scarcity driven, accumulation focused, individualistic, egotistical, perpetual growth oriented. So the economic systems and the ways that we exchange value with each other don't quite support the model of regenerative purpose yet, I would say. So there are a lot of, especially, I mean, as a musician, you can probably relate to this. As an author, same thing. Creative works in particular, I think, are largely co-opted by corporate machines of extraction. And most of the value that we create is kind of lost, I would say, or not efficiently redistributed, because we're kind of, held hostage by the Amazons and the Spotifys of the world that are taking an inordinate share of that value. So there is a lot of work to do individually in terms of changing behavior, but also on a systemic level, redesigning the ways that we share and exchange value with each other. And I think that blockchain and things like that, there's a lot of potential there to disintermediate some of these bigger players and to have more direct exchange. And there's all these models for like Patreon and Substack where people can pay creators more directly. So there are innovations happening in that area, and there's a lot of positive momentum, I would say, in terms of like talking about wave building. There is a wave. It is happening. And I would love to see more people join that wave just by being conscious of supporting the old paradigm model of economic exchange versus investing in a new one.
Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of something you wrote, which is if we want to get paid well for purpose work, the fastest road to that future is to be zealous and generous in paying others for their purpose work. I could feel myself kind of tingly, like my whole body reading that, because I was like, I really know what you mean by that. And from the outside world, I find that when I tell people that I'm an astrologer or that I do astrology work, I'm either met with people being really confused or really demeaning around it. But it's really fascinating that this community kind of, what I've experienced is that the astrological community kind of created a really powerful connection with, one another and with this form of art as well, and that ultimately we actually as individuals and as communities, we're the real engine to what makes a particular venture alive or not, like it's not really that complicated actually. and it's kind of eye-opening for me to have been in this community and to see the ways that like supporting one another's work create its own economy in a way,
Yeah, we the people can take the power back by just being connected with each other and being in community instead of seeing each other as competition, right? Because there's more than enough for everybody, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of this, I guess, distorted teaching around abundance mindset and making a lot of money, I think it's missing half of the equation, right? Because I say that in the book, my definition of abundance is the space between what you think you have and what you think you need. The what you think part is important because it just points to the fact that both of those are mind constructs, right? There is practical reality, which I'm not bypassing, but there's also the idea that that is a very individual thing. So the dollar amount that is quote unquote enough for you living in New York City versus me living on an island in Thailand is vastly different. Yet there is still this freedom of perception around what is enough, right? So I think a lot of the abundance coaching and like wealth gurus out there, they're really focusing on the top line of like making more money. And the other part of it, which is like a lesser known movement or perhaps less published and promoted, is the minimalism movement, right? Of having, holding, and owning less, which opens up a lot of space and creates a lot of energy. And it's about being in balance. It's not about the size, right, of the wealth. It's about the balance of giving and receiving. It's about the balance of creating and consuming. So you can have a very small life financially, but have a very abundant life energetically just by being in balance of the giving and creating and being in connection with the community.
Yeah. Exactly. And yeah, it's really interesting, I think, to witness the lives of, people like yourself who are, kind of trying to figure out what it looks like to be outside of the rat race of the American capitalism. Yeah.
I mean, it's a hack also, right? Because it speaks to the fact that we're not there yet as a society, right?
Yeah.
Or you would be able to do this in any location, right? But what I'm doing is basically geographical arbitrage in the sense that I'm still plugged into the US economy and my US clients and get paid in dollars and spend money in baht, right? That is a position of privilege that, you know, I have access to, and I can make that choice, but it's not the default, not by a long shot, right? And there are many people not able to make the same choices that I have made in order to free themselves of that system. So this is what I mean, where I feel like in this receptivity dimension, that's where we have the most work to do systemically, because the system is still stacked against that way of being actually flowing efficiently. And it has everything to do with the ways that we assign value to things, the way that we charge, the way that we price, but also the way that money moves, and who allows it to move, and who is tracking its movements, and who is taking a piece of it along the way, right? So there's a lot of different things baked into that. I think I have thought about writing a second book, and I think it would be called something like economic exchange ecosystems or something like that. But it would basically be a deeper dive into the receptivity dimension of the model, or the abundance flow model, and really looking at both individually and systemically, what are the things that need to shift? Because I think they both need to have major transitions happening, because we can't just do it by individual choice. Like, we can influence it with individual choice by, you know, boycotting Amazon or whatever it is. But ultimately, the system also needs to change.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I look forward to that book.
We'll see if it happens.
Yes. Okay. I want to wind us down to a close. I honor your time, and I feel like our time together has just completely flown by. I have a couple final questions for you. The first one is, I'm curious, if I offer up the phrase healing the spirit to you, what comes up for you? Any images, memories, stories, you know, perception of challenges, or anything that criticism that you may have around that phrase?
It doesn't compute for me for some reason.
Oh.
Spirit. My mind, spirit is something that doesn't need healing. It's the human that needs healing. I don't know. I get a blank.
I love what you were saying earlier. I think that's a really important piece of it too, that the spirit itself doesn't really need healing. It's the human access to it. But yeah. I'll tell you about how it came to me. Originally, this podcast, I wanted to name it Future Language, because I had been thinking about astrology and how astrology can be used as kind of a linguistic technology, in a sense, to describe our internal experience that provides a different way into the human experience that is slightly detached from our current, you know, lexicon, dictionary, and also away from our more psychologically based way of describing ourselves. And I kind of stuck with that name for a while. But then right before launching it, I realized that there was another podcast with that name, with the name Future Language. And so it kind of made me pause a little bit and really sat down and asked my guides about, like, is this the name for the podcast? And then they said that that's the name of the first season, but that the name of the podcast is Healing the Spirit. And I had a huge resistance towards it, because I was like, it sounds like, you know, a project name for, you know, a white lady who was born in the 60s, you know? So I really didn't like it. I was like, no, don't. And I was like, why did you give this to me? And they were like, that's exactly why we gave it to you. So yeah, it is a really strange name. And I feel like I'm also always kind of in a process of, I think it's an interesting access point for contemplation. I don't think there's like I haven't really felt like there's a, actually every time I hear it, I think about a Miyazaki movie. I don't know if you've ever watched Miyazaki's movies like Spirited Away or
Okay.
My Neighbor Totoro. So Miyazaki is like a Japanese anime film director, and his work is really around like weaving children's tales and anime that is, you know, suitable for children, but that also translates and kind of slips down this message around Japanese animism. And the word healing the spirit, actually, for me personally, I always think about this idea of like how the land has spirits, and that we've kind of lost access to the spirit of the land, and to being able to communicate and commune with the spirit of the land, and how that process of restoring our access to it is kind of a two-way process.
Yeah, I like that. The thing that occurred to me when you were speaking too is that maybe it's not meant to be in English. Maybe in another language, healing the spirit would be something with a slightly different nuance or poetic.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. It's definitely a translation, which I think is, you know, a lot of spiritual work or whatever feels like translation to me. And it's always really challenging to find the right words for it, especially in English, I think.
Yeah, there you go back to the future language thing, right? So
Yeah,
being
exactly.
one of the things that I was going to say in the beginning when you were asking me about I don't even remember what the question is, like, who do you take yourself to be or whatever? And I was just like, recently started adopting the phrase word witch as something that fits. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. I think you have a particular affinity with words. I always find that you're so economical and very precise with your words, which is a gift. How can people find your work, Wendy? How can people find, you know, your writings and your transmissions?
HeyWendyMay.com is my website. And I'm pretty much Hey Wendy May on all the social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook. I have a Substack channel, Hey Wendy May. Yeah, so all the ways. LinkedIn also. Yeah. Hey Wendy May, that's it.
Awesome. Yay. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your amazing work. And I've just really enjoyed spending this time with you.
Thank you. I'm excited to hear the podcast.
Yay. All right, that is it for my conversation with Wendy May. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you found something nourishing, something inspiring, something shifting for you as you were listening to our conversation. If you resonate with Wendy's work, I highly recommend that you check out Wendy's book, Regenerative Purpose. All of the links will be on the show notes below. Find ways to work with Wendy, find ways to support Wendy on her Substack. I can't recommend her work highly enough. If you have enjoyed this podcast, if you have enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you could leave a review for us. Apple Podcast, I believe, is the only way that you can leave a review. A review can be very short. 2-3 sentences are totally enough. It won't take more than 5 minutes of your time, I promise. And it will be so helpful in helping me get this work out there to more people who would enjoy these conversations and these contemplations that I'm sharing on the podcast. And if you are listening on the device or on a platform, I suppose, that is not Apple Podcast, then you can leave a 5-star review, and that will also be very much appreciated. All right. Until next time we meet again, I hope you take good care of yourselves, and I'm sending you so much love. Thank you for listening.